Hi everyone, here at the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum, and this is footage shot during AusArmourFest 2024, and this is of a British tank from World War II. This is the Cruiser Mark VIII, or as it was commonly called, the Cromwell. Now, I did a video back in 2022 about a very early production version of the Cromwell Mark I, that's at the Australian Army Tank Museum. This variant was fitted with a 6-pounder main gun, and I suggest you take a look at that if you're interested, because that vehicle was sent out here for trials by the Australian Army. Now, the variant that we're looking at here is the Cromwell Mark IV, so it was a later iteration of the Cromwell and used a different main gun. Now, in the lead up to World War II, British Armour Doctrine recognised that there were 3 different kinds of tanks for different kinds of roles. Light tanks were to be used for scouting and reconnaissance, infantry tanks were being used to support dismounted infantry and attacking entrenched adversaries, and cruiser tanks were needed to exploit breakthroughs in anti-armour roles and operating in an attacking role behind the front lines. This doctrine meant, as well summarised by others, that the British ended up without a decent medium tank for most of World War II. Now, the Cromwell here is a cruiser tank, meaning that the design emphasis was on speed rather than armour. Its frontal armour, initially 64mm on the front hull and 76mm on the turret front, was increased to 100mm on the hull front in later marks using applique armour. Top speed of this tank was 64 kph, which was at the upper end for World War II tanks. Now, just taking a peek here inside the driver's front hatch, the driver sat on the right side of the vehicle, and next to that was the radio operator's position, where there was also a 7.92mm Beezer machine gun. You can see here the type of angle iron and riveted construction that was used to put the frame together on this type of tank. The British still weren't able to fully weld tank hulls when the Cromwell was being built. Now, this version of the Cromwell, the Mark IV, was built early in 1944 and was fitted with the QF 75mm gun. And that was an adaptation of the QF 6-pounder, which had a 57mm bore. So the QF 75 was capable of firing the same ammunition as the Sherman M3 75mm gun, which simplified the supply of ammunition into British armoured units. At the time of the Normandy invasion, the vast majority of British and Commonwealth tank formations were equipped with M4 Shermans sporting 75mm guns. Now, looking here at the side of the vehicle, you can see a good overview of the suspension. You've got 5 large road wheels, which are mounted on swing arms with vertical springs. This is so-called Christie suspension, which is really good for high-speed travel because it allows the wheels to articulate quite a lot, and the helical springs mounted vertically can soak up quite large undulations in the road. Now, just have a look here inside the radio operator / gunner's fighting compartment, and as we zoom in, you can see more of this construction where you've got like an internal frame and bolted and riveted plates onto that frame. Now, as I mentioned, the vehicle had a suspension, Christie type suspension, that was really good for high-speed travel, and the vehicle had a top speed of 64 kph. And that's why these were called cruiser tanks. It was in line with this British idea where tanks were initially developed by the Navy, and a cruiser tank, just like a cruiser ship, was a sort of vehicle that would travel fast, which would have a relatively large armament, but would be relatively lightly armoured. Now, as with most British cruiser tanks and most British tanks of World War II, you've got a rear-mounted drive sprocket, so engines in the back with the transmission and the drive sprocket, road wheels, and at the front you've got a niter. Now, at the back here you've got the engine, as I mentioned. So in the case of the Cromwell, it was a Rolls-Royce Meteor 27-litre V12 petrol developing about 410 kilowatts. This gave British cruiser tanks finally a well-powered engine that was not overly stressed and prone to failure, and it delivered high speed, 64 kph maximum speed, and when paired with the suspension, it gave it excellent cross-country performance of 29 kph on rough roads. So in terms of production, about 4,016 were produced in all types. Were used mainly by the British Armoured Corps, with some supplied to Polish armoured units for use in Normandy. It was employed mainly in 1944 and 1945 after the Normandy landings, and it was the main tank of the 7th Armoured Division. In other tank units, it tended to mostly be used in a scouting and reconnaissance role, where its high speed could be leveraged. In these cases, it served alongside Shermans that formed the bulk of the tanks that were used in Normandy. Now, this version, as I mentioned, the Mark IV, had the QF 75mm gun, which fired an AP round that could only penetrate about 68mm of angled rolled homogeneous armour at 500 yards, so not very effective as an AP type weapon. However, it had an effective high explosive round containing about 650 grams of explosive. And it's worth noting that the smaller bore 6-pounder, QF 6-pounder, which this gun was based on, had superior arm piercing capability due to the availability of British AP composite rigid ammunition. However, the loss in armour piercing performance with the 75mm compared with the ability to commonize ammunition with the Sherman and get an effective HE round was considered a worthwhile trade-off. The Cromwell Mark VI, of which 341 were produced, were fitted with a 95mm howitzer for engaging non-armoured targets. Now, for the Mark IV, in addition to the 75mm main gun, The vehicle was also fitted with 2 machine guns, one mounted coaxially with the main gun and one mounted in a ball on the front of the turret. So they were both 7.92mm Beezer machine guns, which were based on the Czech ZB53 machine gun. Now it has to be said that the Cromwell was an improvement over previous British cruisers, but it still lacked the ability to mount the superb QF 17-pounder anti-tank gun that the British had developed early in 1940. For this, a new turret was needed, which resulted in the 17-pounder Challenger A30 tank that was deployed in Normandy in July 1944, and about 200 of these were made. In short, the Cromwell didn't quite strike the right balance between armour, mobility and armament to be considered an excellent late war medium tank. However, on this reliable chassis was built a large number of variants, including the Centaur, which was powered by a 290 kilowatt 27-litre Liberty V12, the Comet tank, the A34, which was fitted with a 77mm high-velocity gun, and also the post-war Charioteer, which was fitted with the 20-pounder main gun. Now this example here with the serial number T189557 was built by English Electric in March 1944 and was issued to the 1st Royal Tank Regiment, where it was delivered to Thetford, where the 22nd Armour Brigade was preparing for the invasion of Europe, and it was known to have landed on Gold Beach on D-Day +1, the 7th of June 1944. So that's all I want to say about the Cromwell, a vehicle that was well liked by its crews and served faithfully from Normandy to the end of the war. I want to thank you for getting to the end of the video and hearing me bang on about this tank. I look forward to talking to you soon about another armoured vehicle or artillery piece, and until then I hope you stay well and we'll talk soon. Bye.